Hello, I'm Amy McAllister Ethel. I'm a public relations and broadcast journalism student at Marshall University. I am also the wife of a wonderful man and the mother of two precious little baby boys. Recently, I had the privilege of meeting a prominent member of our community. Dotty Johnson is one very amazing lady, and I am thrilled to have the opportunity to do this digital story about her life. Dotty Johnson is a New York native and arrived in West Virginia in 1949. She was a professor first at WVU, then at Marshall. She taught at Marshall for 28 years. 16 of those years were spent as chair for the Department of Speech. Dotty Johnson is the wife of Bos Johnson, who worked in commercial broadcasting for 53 years. 24 of those years were spent at WSAZ. Dotty has led an extraordinary life. She has 5 children, and they are all college graduates and beyond. She also has 9 grandchildren and has made many, many contributions to our community.
Well, the first decade of raising a family, I didn't go outside the home to work. I don't think I could have. They were all too close together. But after Rob was born, after Rob was about 2 years old, then I went back to work full time. And as I told you before, it was either that or the booby hatch. I don't like being a stay-at-home mother, and therefore I really needed to go to work. And I loved it. Give them your whole attention when you're with them, and make sure they are well cared for when you're not with them. That's the best advice I can give.
That's really good advice.
When I went home, I was mother. And the first thing I did, of course, was have to listen to what went on in school all day. And then we had to worry about, have you done your homework? And then we had lots of conversations about Campfire Girls and, you know, all that stuff, and the group at church. But then when they went to bed, I went back to being a professor again and went to the table and graded papers. I think kids tend to copy their parents pretty largely. Think about what my kids do. They're all into education of one kind or another, and the boy is in broadcasting. So he's just copying his father, and all the girls are copying me. They wouldn't admit that. I'm sure they would deny it, but that's what happens. Bos would tell you that I raised the kids with a rolled-up newspaper. I can remember every night I would go upstairs wearily with that rolled-up newspaper and say, if you all don't be quiet and put your head on the pillow and go to sleep, I'm going to come in there. Well, I never did go in, but they giggled their way into sleep. There were too many of them, you understand, and they were sharing bedrooms, and it was more conducive to play than to going to sleep. But I did more discipline by, how do I say it, threat, than ever doing anything about it. When your child goes away to college, you think you miss them? You think you wish to have them back? Do you think, oh, why is college so far away? But you don't make them come home, because they are doing something that is not only good for them, but they are loving it. And besides, they'll be home at Thanksgiving. Well, I was very fortunate to have a good boss. I had a good boss who hired me, a good chairman of the department when I was a faculty member, and a superb dean when I became chairman. That's the whole secret of my success. The afternoon I retired, back in those days, they always had a big luncheon for the faculty who were retiring, and they had it after commencement. The final event of the year, so to speak, was commencement. It wasn't really, of course, because then you had to go home and finish grading the final exams. But after commencement, there was this big luncheon for the retiring faculty. Then I went home from that luncheon, and the telephone rang all afternoon. Would you like to be on this committee? Will you please serve on that board? And you could take as many jobs as you wanted. And my best advice when you get to that place is take a few of them, because you'll be bored out of your skull otherwise. Take the ones that really matter. So I, got on the United Fund board. I got on the Habitat board. I got on this and that. Here comes the sermon. Are you sure you're
I'm ready.
I don't think a Christian has any other choice. If you are a Christian, you are to serve others. And I have found lots of ways to serve others. Through Habitat, through contact, through, Well, I think both of us meant it when we said I do. When you make a commitment, it's a commitment. One time, after we'd been married several years, I don't know how long, my mother-in-law was visiting, and she was nifty. I loved her. And I was ironing, and she came in the kitchen and talked to me, and she said, "Have you ever considered divorce?" And I said, "No, I never have, but I have thought about murder." And she laughed and left the kitchen, and then pretty soon she came back. And she said, "If you decide to do it, you let me know, because I'll help you. It was probably my fault." That's a good question. I think we do have reunions. Once a year they all get together here. This summer we're going to have 2 weddings in the family. 2 grandchildren are being married. I can't go, and Bos won't go, but the others will all be there. But that isn't the only way we get together. We're on email, and the grandchildren are all on Facebook, and they communicate constantly, like multiple times a day. And if you want to eavesdrop on that, all you have to do is read their email to each other or contribute your own, That may be trivial kinds of interaction, but if you need serious interaction, there's something called a telephone. Now, there's a lot lost in that. I venture to make the judgment that there is no genuine communication if you're texting and talking and, doing 3 things at once. Communication is looking each other in the eye and really understanding what the other person's saying. Remember, communication only occurs in the brain of the receiver. Profoundly. He was an electrical engineer, worked for GE, which accounts for all the 23 houses I lived in before I met Bos. And as an engineer, you know he was busy all week long. But he preached on Sunday at a little mission church that didn't have enough money to pay a preacher. And my mother was always heavily involved in church stuff. Now, you hear where I'm going with this? Mm-hmm. Children tend to imitate their parents. So now we have a couple sons-in-law who are preachers and a daughter who teaches in a seminary.
So good.
There were no classes the day after the crash occurred on Saturday night, the memorial service Sunday. There were no classes Monday or Tuesday. On Wednesday, I went to school, I had a 9 o'clock class, went naively to my 9 o'clock thinking I was going to talk about the subject matter of the class, and I found out I was looking at a whole classroom full of kids who had been in the dorm all weekend with somebody next door dead and no counselors. And many of them, probably most of them, had never had a death in the family or of a friend in their lives. And they couldn't cope. And they didn't know how to process it. And we spent that whole hour processing their grief, their fright, their upset, and from that day forward, Marshall got counselors on the staff. It was a terrible way to learn that lesson. I only had about 175 favorite students. One student, this is going to be a hard question for me. To pick out a few, I was fond of many, but one former student of mine, of whom I am very proud, I'll bet you every college student knows very well, and that's Dr. Bailey, who is in charge of the campus radio station. Another one whom we talked about at the lunch table was his predecessor as the manager of the radio station, Keith Spears. Does the name Joe Johns mean anything to you? Do you listen to national television? Joe Johns is a reporter, I think at the White House maybe now, or at least he was. He was in my class. He was great. He really was. And he came back to visit me when he was in Hollywood. One of my favorite Billy Crystal stories was what happened after he got to be a big star, and his son was going to be 11 years old. And Billy was starring on a play on Broadway. So after the show on Broadway was over, he chartered an airplane, flew to the West Coast, thereby gaining 4 hours, of course, got himself wrapped up in a package like a present, and delivered on the doorstep of his own home, had the person who delivered him ring the bell and run away. And when his son answered the door, there was his birthday present, and out popped his father. After I had lived here for a long, long time, a dear friend of mine, somebody I really liked a lot, introduced me to someone else as a newcomer. And I said, Mrs. Dunbar, how can you call me a newcomer? I've lived here for 35 years. And she said, well, your children aren't newcomers. They were born here. You hear that? The corollary is you're going to die an outsider. You're never going to be a Huntingtonian. I don't know. I really don't know. Clearly, there's no answer to that. I hope Bos will remember me one way and the kids another way. And I hope people like you will remember me as a kind friend, but in a quite different way. So I don't know the answer to that.
Dotty Johnson, college professor, wife, mother, grandmother, friend, volunteer, and servant. I learned many things about her that day, but my favorite moment came when she said she was going to tell me a great mystery. The mystery being that she had been married 62 years, but was only 39 years old. She said she had been 39 years old for a long time.